Well. It's Wednesday, August 30th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Bob Harris. This is the Football Diehards YouTube channel, and it's time to go on the hot seat. That sounds so exciting. But first, FootballDiehards.com is the website. We appreciate you joining us here on the YouTube channel every Wednesday at this time, also on Saturdays at noon. Ask me anything. Love having you here for that. Hit the subscribe button, all the things, the notification bell, the YouTube-y stuff. Once you've done that, hit the like button. We love it when you like us. And I'm going to hit the dislike button so you don't feel like an outlier. If you really don't like me, it's okay. I'm all right with that. I'm very secure and all that. Well, not really, but I pretend to be. I know all the regulars on these live streams draft a lot. Right? And that being the case, I'm going to guess you off and find, like I do, somebody in those drafts that makes you stop and say, look at what that guy or look at what that gal is doing. And why are they doing that? Or more importantly, why am I not doing that? Tonight's guest is that guy for me. And I know people who know me know I'm using different words when I say it in real life. But that guy is Jordan Fiegleman. You know him from Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life, the chief content officer there. And also a wild man in the draft rooms every time, Jordan. Welcome to the show, Jordan. Glad to see you. Glad to see you too, bud. Always great to be here. Right. And so, like, every time, I mean, whether I'm drafting with you or I'm covering drafts that you're in on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio, I'm always watching. I'm going, damn, that is interesting. And I think it's kind of like I love those different approaches. And just in general, as we're sitting here, and by the way, hello, everyone in the chat. Nice to see you, Royal Slade, Andrea Dame, Jim, Brian, Golfway. Thanks for coming. We'll kind of catch up with the questions. If you have them, go ahead and throw them in the chat, Andrea. As everyone knows, we will get to those over the course of time. But if I was asking you, you know, and like I'm in the process, Jordan, of going from best ball mindset to redraft mindset as I get down to this last week, and I'm trying to forget how I've been investing in best ball because it's way different than what I'm doing in redraft. Mm-hmm. What is just your overall, just kind of lay out the basic strategy you like to lean on? I like to win regularly. That's something that I'm very interested in overall. What I would say realistically is that I would rather come in dead last than make the playoffs and fizzle out. And that really dictates a lot of my strategy decision. I love redraft. I love dynasty. I love it all, but I really came up in this industry in DFS. And for a long time, I was playing a lot of DFS. And I think best ball really correlates to that as we get to the end of the season, as we talk about the situations that we're trying to predict in these week 17 matchups or the stacks that we have to do. So that's always how I've leaned towards things. And the best ball format allows me to focus on that. But when it comes to redraft, I'm in the exact same way. Like later on tonight, I'll be doing our Pros with Joe's draft. Really excited for doing that for another year. And I have the same mindset there. My only issue is I have to convince someone who's co-managing the team with me that it's fine being in last place. Because for me, I want to win and I want to win big and I will do whatever it takes. And typically I skew higher towards wide receivers and I try to avoid running backs. I'm open and I play the boards, obviously, but I am very deep into zero RB culture is what I'll say as my overall. So winning, being aggressive, and a lack of running backs. Yeah, it was last year's Pros with Joe's that really hit me. And you convinced your co-manager in that one. I will be drafting Friday in the Pros with Joe's. A great charitable thing. There's still some people out there who their charitable donations are still open. So if you're out there on the Pros with Joe's website, the people who are drafting next week, they're still available to get your donations in. So go out there and do that if you get a chance, people. And so that's the thing. I think I try to tell people here in the live stream on a regular basis, you know, like nobody remembers who's second place. Everyone remembers who's the champion. And you know why they remember? Because you're going to tell them you were the champion over and over and over, because that's part of the joy of winning the championship. Otherwise, you're saying nothing, as you said. I mean, there is no second place is last place, essentially, right? So this is the great approach. So just lay out, like, you know, as you're sitting there looking at a draft, walking into a draft room, what is the primary objective as you start out a draft? Yeah, so I guess this year we talked specifically, we've been working on a concept of Fantasy Life. We did this last year too, but we call it like choose your own adventure almost, right? And last year it was a little bit different in terms of the point in the first round that really dictates a lot of your decisions. But this year we start off in a situation where you could go out there and you could find very, very good players to draft. You could find very good players to build a team around, but
if you have 1 and 2, you should be getting a high-powered wide receiver. Like that's the direction. Don't blow it. Like, you're not smarter than the market. I'm not smarter than the market. No one at Fantasy Life is either. Like, that's something that we get now with this much best ball data in front of us, is that if we're getting millions of drafts and millions of picks versus of a ADP, like, we understand that number 1 and number 2 are pretty entrenched, and that's Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. And then as you get into 3 through 7, you have some optionality. You have some flexibility. Personally, I'm always taking Tyreek Hill at 3. I will mix in Cooper Kupp, but I'm a Tyreek Hill guy, and I like that archetype of player a little bit more than I like Cooper Kupp. And we could compare them directly, but overall, I have a little bit more faith in Tua than I do Matthew Stafford. I think overall, it's a pretty concentrated offense on both sides. You could say that Waddle is a bigger threat for targets than Tyler Higbee for sure, but at the same time, it's a different level of explosiveness. Then from there, I'll definitely consider a Christian McCaffrey. I'll consider a Cooper Kupp. I'll talk about Travis Kelce or any of the different running backs. But I think, generally speaking, in the first 3 rounds of drafts this year, if you're not coming away with 2 wide receivers, it's going to be tough to make up for it. And again, I'm very biased towards wide receivers, but if you think about it, let's just game it out, right? Let's think about it from a perspective of, you have the 12th pick and you say, I'm going to take CeeDee Lamb, and at 12 and at 13, I'm going to take Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm going to try to get that correlation between the Cowboys and the Lions for week 17, and they're great wide receivers. So then when you come back on the turn, your choices are probably going to be a mix at this point in the season. Maybe Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor's obviously falling a little bit. Breece Hall is in that area. If you're lucky, you might be able to luck into a T. Higgins or a Devonta Smith if they fall. Maybe one of the elite quarterbacks will start going off the board there. But then if you don't take wide receivers in that first spot, and you say, you know what, Nick Chubb fell to me at 12, I'm going to do that. I'm going to take Bijan Robinson at 14. Then your options on the turn on the way back really are rough for wide receiver. And it's pretty much in your best interest to take a running back there. Earlier in the offseason, Tony Pollard was there. Great pick. Now it's a little bit different, obviously. So overall, I think it really comes down to this thing that Ian Hartitz has been saying all summer long at Fantasy Life. And it's, what can I get now that I cannot get later? And for me, that's wide receivers and really elite wide receivers. What do you think about it, though? I mean, I admit to my friends, people at Fantasy Life, that I'm intense. Like, my drafting strategy is more aggressive than most.
It totally is. And that's why, it's noticeable, right? And that's why I find it fascinating. And, I mean, you will push that wide receiver limit all the way out beyond where I'm thinking, oh, wow, how far is he going to go? And it ends up, not that bad. But, look, I could go back and start reading you off the list of running backs that have come out of nowhere to win people fantasy titles. It's not easy to identify them because some of them are laying on the couch, said C.J. Anderson at some point before they come in and win you that title. But you've got to be aggressive. You can't do that in best ball, but in redraft, you can be watching the waiver wire. So for me, I feel like this year in particular, what we referred to as the dead zone, the running back dead zone, is anything but dead. Right? And we have a question about one of the guys. We'll get to this in a second there, Golf Boy. But I think there's a whole range of running backs that I feel super comfortable waiting on, getting to that 5th, 6th, 7th round, 8th round even. I mean, I say 8th round because I think I got Dalvin Cook in the 8th round in a draft 2 nights ago. I think that's crazy good value, right? But we can go through that whole range of guys, and it probably starts with maybe Kenneth Walker, maybe a little after that, however you see it. But includes Dameon Pierce, Alexander Mattison, J.K. Dobbins, Miles Sanders, Cam Akers, Javonte Williams, James Conner, Alvin Kamara, Rachaad White. That entire group, is the worst thing. For me, it's not and I probably changed this because I used to be, as old people, I remember when you always have the running backs, right? So it's changed. I feel perfectly comfortable having any of that range of guys I just mentioned as my running back 1 right now. And then even waiting past that, and I'm still not, there are some players that I feel really comfortable with. So we do have a question. We'll get to that because it's kind of relative to this. Golf Boy asked this, and I think it's fair. Dameon Pierce is a guy that I think people have kind of mixed opinions on. Is he a fair buy at 55 as an RB2? I'm kind of on board with that. Where are you at?
I'm with that as well. I'll be honest. I love the range of running backs a little bit higher, right? In that 80 range, the 70 to 80 range. I have a fair amount of Pierce as well. For anybody that doesn't know, over at Fantasy Life, we have this tool called the Best Ball Hub, completely free. You just get your CSV from Underdog and you upload it. So I could go through all the drafts and see how much Pierce I have. So I'm actually, checking and understanding. And in reality, I'm only 1% over the market. So if you draft an average team, if you draft a bunch of players, every player that you end up with will have 8% on average. That's an even distribution. So if you're at 9%, that's 1% over the market. I look at that and I say, I probably want a little bit more Dameon Pierce. I really do, right? Like earlier in the offseason, I was drafting a little bit more of Kenneth Walker. The injuries kind of scared me away a little bit. And because the way that I build most of my teams, it's a pretty big liability for me to have my first running back off the board not play games, and that worries me even in the middle of the summer. So what I would say is that I really like the Kenneth Walkers of the world, the Dameon Pierce of the world, the Dalvin Cooks of the world in different situations when they fall at value. My favorite in that range right now is Alexander Madison. And I would say a little bit behind that range is James Cook. And he's really the guy that stands out to me as someone that I want to get on my teams in a bad way. I will overpay for James Cook currently. There's a few of those guys that I'm really into. And right now, we actually have a video coming out from Dwayne McFarland in a few days. And we're kind of saying, hey, for these few players right now, if you need to get them, overpay. And typically we're pretty sensitive to that. But right now it's like, hey, you got to get them. You got to find your guys.
People in the regulars here will hear me refer to Dwayne regularly, way regularly. He's a super smart guy. And he as well. I mean, great team over there, by the way. Just everybody.
Thank you.
Deep roster of some of my favorite people too in the business as well. Great working with Kendall Valenzuela, Chris Allen, the longtime favorite. Just great group. But I guess, so you talk about that fear. Like I go back to I kind of have like 2 seasons of best ball. I start out earlier on best ball 10s and then I switch over to Underdog. On best ball 10s, I'm probably like 46% on James Conner, right? I just see a super clear path to workload. I'm injury agnostic. I'm not going to fear the injuries. Look, injury agnostic, not stupid. If someone's hurt going into the season, okay. But if they're not hurt, I'm going to give them every opportunity. In terms of Pierce and I think Connor to some degree, how concerned are you about investing in guys that aren't on great offenses? Or I believe it was Ian probably, or maybe Dwayne did something on that, right? Where there's a pretty solid correlation between the success of running backs on lousy teams, which seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, and the thing that really ties here is opportunity and volume, right? The reality is if you're sitting there asking me, hey, Jordan, what's up, man? Would you rather Dameon Pierce on a better team? Yeah, of course I would rather Dameon Pierce on a better team. Like these are non-one-for-one questions, right? The other aspect of that is saying, look at how many plays a team runs. If we have a stat we're really working on that Dwayne is pursuing that's called dropbacks over expectation. So it's kind of a replacement for pass over expectation. And what this does is it looks at different game situations and what teams do in different situations. So more or less, you could find out what teams pass more than average when they're trailing big, what teams run more than average when they're behind, which is an odd thing to do. And you could understand what teams and what types of players to target. But volume to me for running backs is everything. And I know that Dwayne and Ian have done a lot of data study on this. And the things that I focus on from a roster construction perspective is that I am willing to not play Dameon Pierce if he's not my guy. A pick's like a 63 ADP for me. Will most likely in most of my builds where I don't have an elite RB like a McCaffrey, like a Tony Pollard, like a Nick Chubb, in probably 80% of those builds, he'll be my RB1. My RB2 is probably Khalil Herbert, James Cook. There's not that big of a gap between those two. So I feel like that's an issue with a lot of players that they get too anchored in to the draft capital. The draft capital matters when you're making your team. But then after that, it doesn't. Imagine how many situations people would have missed out on in Odell Beckham's rookie season, right? Imagine how many situations people would have missed out on with Jonas Gray in 2010 scoring 5 touchdowns in one game. Like those things happen all the time. And when you're trying to, especially when you're trying to win big contests, you need some of those things to break your way. And That's why I feel like the whole range. We could talk about Pacheco. We could talk about Cook, both the Cooks. We could talk about Khalil Herbert. We could talk about James Conner. For me, I obviously I would prefer Kenneth Walker and Dameon Pierce, but if you're telling me I could get Pacheco and James Cook, or James Cook and maybe Antonio Gibson a few rounds later, plus a very strong wide receiver, if you're telling me that I could leave a draft with Deontay Johnson, Khalil Herbert, or James Cook versus Dameon Pierce and then a Cortland Sutton, I think you know where I'm going. And right. I think about those a lot, and it goes back. I'm got to put it on a t-shirt for Ian. What could you get now that you can't get later? And for me, that's how I side.
I mean, I've been using that mindset a little bit more, and it's mostly to pivot away from my entrenched strategies, the strategies that I've been using for years and years to take different approaches. And some of the players that I'm ending up with, I'm pretty happy with, that I wouldn't have otherwise ended up with. I want to ask a couple. So a few questions in the chat here. We'll get
Please.
to here. Harlem Mundo wants to know. He has a second overall pick in a PPR league, in a snake draft. So he wants to know if it's CMC or Chase. And I guess, this is to me, it's a pretty close call. Yeah, I think you've hinted at this as well. Where do you draw the line there? How are you determining this from draft to draft?
Well, if you're playing in an industry league, I'm going 100% wide receiver. If you're playing with a home league and some different tendencies in your draft, like you have to play those in. But for me, it's Chase, and it's not particularly close. To be honest, I look at Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Bijan, all in a very, very tight range for me. And you're telling me that I could get Bijan 8 picks later if I have a 9 to 12 pick, or if I want to do that. And for me, I'm less confident in Christian McCaffrey than I've been in years past. Last year, I went into 150 Best Ball Mania drafts, plus, all my redrafts teams without a single share of Jonathan Taylor, and I was super confident with it. And I was saying to myself, this is going to be good. This year, I do not feel that way about McCaffrey again. I think that Elijah Mitchell is really good. I think that the usage of those players when both healthy has shown that the 49ers want to use both of Mitchell and McCaffrey. And when I'm paying an elite price, I really want that number one running back to do it. For me, if we're not talking about ADP and we're not talking about playing the market, I have McCaffrey, Eckler, Bijan, Chubb, and Pollard all in the same tier. I really do. And it's all about the build and the value for me. So right. In the years past, I would 100% be considering it. Today, I'm saying Chase every single time.
I think you mentioned Elijah Mitchell. When he is on the field with McCaffrey's totals dip noticeably. Significantly, 7 points or more a game, depending on the scoring system. So that's a little bit of a concern. Also, that said, just the offense rose up so much with McCaffrey in the mix. You wonder if that's not going to be influence how they use him, maybe change the utilization a little bit this year. But you bring up another thing. So I'm getting a question. Royal Slave wants to know, feet to the fire, how early would you take Jahmyr Gibbs? And so I want to spin off what you're talking about that tier. So I do love Bijan. I think he is going to be a great play. I have concerns about the Falcons' overall offensive volume. I have less concerns about the Lions. Also, if we're investing in a rookie running back based on draft capital expended, because that's kind of how this is working. Why is Gibbs not equally as valuable as Bijan Robinson, or damn near as equally valuable as Bijan Robinson? How do you see Jahmyr Gibbs? I'll tell you, I'm drafting him. I don't want to get him into the second round. I've seen him go in the second round, and it irritates the living hell out of me because I want him in the third round. I liked him better in the fourth, but I'll take him in the third. Where are you at on Gibbs?
I like Gibbs, and I'll take him ahead of a lot of other options, especially in best ball and redraft. I'm a little bit more afraid, to be completely honest. I think that the Lions have shown that they don't really love his style of play, and I don't want to hold the sins of DeAndre Swift management onto him, but there are quite a few similarities. There are quite a few stylistic connections. Obviously, Gibbs is a better athlete. He's a much more athletic and fast player. Swift is very agile and understands the different parts of the game. Montgomery, if we're talking narrative, really fits that kneecap mentality. You know, when we were doing the Kings Classic broadcast from Canton in it was like 3 weeks ago, we had Dave Richard on the show from CBS, and
right.
he had a really good quote talking about like, oh my God, the Lions actually know what they're doing now. You know, like they're building towards a culture and they're well on their way to restoring the roar, if you will. And I worry about that. I'm taking him. But again, I really don't see that big of a difference between him and Kenneth Walker, between Kenneth Walker and Dameon Pierce. So I'm playing the board and I'm seeing what's happening. I will say a lot that if I am starting, maybe I get a situation in which I end up with one of those elite running backs and I'm trying to do like a double anchor build, I definitely consider him. I definitely, because then I feel a little bit safer. I feel a little bit more warm and fuzzy. Like if I come out of round one with one of those running backs, I could feel good about him.
I did a draft last night where I was just trying to do some different things. Took McCaffrey, I want to say it was the fourth pick, and came back, got Calvin Ridley in round 2, got Gibbs in round 3, and Darren Waller in round 4, and followed that up with Christian Watson, who we'll talk about here shortly, in round 5. And I felt like that was a pretty good start. But there's a great question here from Jim. So big play guys like Ridley, Drake London, George Pickens all go well after round 1. So why isn't it better to take a top running back or wide receiver with the top 2 picks instead of 2 elite wide receivers if you're getting some of those big play guys later?
Yeah.
Because you want all of them. I already know this answer.
Yeah, that's the answer. I want them all, right? I want it all, and I want it today. The data has shown, and I could point anybody in chat to some of Dwayne's work that he's been. When I say that Dwayne McFarland has been working overtime on our data projects for this year, I mean it. Next week we'll be showing a lot. I'll give you a little tease here, Bob, because I know that you're the best. But we'll have everything from a data perspective that Dwayne used to work basically 30 hours from Monday to the end of Tuesday. We'll have that automatically ready to go for free for everybody. So we spent all summer long like building around it. But basically, what they found is that wide receivers always score more. If in ideal situations, a wide receiver presents more value in a draft. Doesn't mean that you ignore other things, obviously. But when you look at this, I draft from a perspective thinking that I'm right because I'm full of myself, but also because that's how I believe you should form a team. So let's say that we leave a draft with Justin Jefferson in the first, and then all of a sudden we come back on the turn and we get a T. Higgins and a running back like Breece Hall, right? From there, I know that I'm going to have 2 stud wide receivers, and I hope that Breece Hall is my stud running back. From there, if I don't want to take another running back until the 90s, that's completely cool with me because I shift my target to volume of running backs, right? So in best ball formats, it's easier. In flex-based formats, it's also easier because you have options to start people in different positions. But when you're talking about volume at running back, you could be talking like let's role play a little bit. If you get a Breece Hall, Khalil Herbert, James Cook, Antonio Gibson, Raheem Mostert, and Jerome Ford, and that's your running back room. Like, I'm okay with that. I know that I will be able to find value on the waiver wire. I know that I'll be in a situation to have some spike weeks there. And especially in a PPR format, especially in a half point PPR or full point, somebody like Khalil Herbert, to me, I don't downgrade him that much from one of those quasi stud running backs. Of course, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to probably have a better season than Herbert. I would be shocked to hear otherwise. But in the aggregate, I could find those spots. It's harder management. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You have to make more difficult decisions. And you just need to press the button, press submit, and walk away. And that's it, right? So I totally understand his question.
I think a lot of us are too. And I, as you say this, I think a lot of people, you're managing in a way that, like, I don't want to make a hard decision every week. I want to have this easy decision every week. That's not always the best way to do this. And something else you said reminds me. I mean, when I first started on Sirius, you try to come up with snappy little sayings to help people, answer questions. And one of the things I came up with was the laws of flexology. The first law of flexology was always a feature back over a wide receiver when you're dealing with the flex. I haven't said that for a number of years now. For the reason you said. It's just like, well, number one, there aren't a lot of feature backs left, and if there are, they don't make it down to your flex level, right? They're your starting running back. There's a handful of them. A great article in this year's Pro Forecast magazine, people, still available on the website, from Marcus Grant, detailing the usage of running backs and how it's shifted and how we all need to get used to the fact that there are going to be multiple running backs for every team. And don't be afraid. You mentioned James Cook. I mean, people will sit out there and say, wow, Damian Harris, he got that carry. It was a goal line. I'm horrified by this. It's probably something you need to get your head around and just deal with instead of being fearful of it and trying to avoid it.
Why in life or in fantasy bother yourself with those types of concerns, right? Like, you have to make a choice. Life is full of decisions, my friend. And it's the truth. And if you're not confident in your decisions in fantasy, maybe you need to reevaluate your decisions in life. But no, in all seriousness, it's a situation in which, like, everybody loves to tinker. That's part of the fun of it too. Everybody likes to drive yourself crazy. Everybody likes to complain about their decisions they've made. I recently, after the expo, I was traveling a bit and I stayed with my parents for a few weeks, and we had our normal fights about I like it cooler and they like it warmer. And they said, why don't you just turn it down? I said, well, I would have nothing to complain about then afterwards. If I was comfortable, I would have nothing to yell at you about. And the reality is that I have tinkered myself out of a lot of money, especially when I was playing a lot of DFS. I have cost myself more than I have gotten myself. And I've gotten to the point, I don't know if it's nihilistic or narcissistic or anything, but I make my decision. I have my friends who I could consult with, and I try to hire really sharp people so I could keep them on the payroll and bother them for those questions. And I live with it. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And if I'm right, I try to make sure I'm going to be right in a way where I could really benefit. And, I'm talking all this crap on running backs. Last year in Pros versus Joes, everyone took wide receivers. It was ridiculous. I ended up drafting 9 running backs, right? And I just inversed everything. So you obviously have to be reactive, and you have to understand that type of league is crazy also because there's no positional requirements whatsoever. It's all flexes, and everyone thinks it's cool to draft wide receivers now. They're getting on the bandwagon. I suggest you guys do it too.
So a few more questions here. Royal Slade, not sure about Pollard. I think that's a fair assessment. We go back to last year. Skip Heath, the running backs coach, talked about how organizationally the team felt like he was better with a limited number of snaps, not necessarily touches, but it was 30 snaps. I don't know that they have the guy to keep him from hitting those 30 snaps this year. Are there any concerns with you that maybe there is that they might overuse him, or is it possible they've changed their view on him?
I have opinions on it. I'm also a self-loathing Cowboys fan, so I try not to get too excited because I've been hurt before. I'm 32, so I'm like just young enough to not get any of the good stuff, but just old enough to be called a bandwagon my whole life. So it's been great. But what I would say is that, okay, like if we're unsure about Pollard, let's shift that uncertainty over to Nick Chubb and say, okay, well, last year he had a little bit more pass volume, but is that going to continue in the future? All of a sudden, we really should be focusing more on running backs that are involved in all phases of the game. Nick Chubb, probably the best rusher in the NFL. Okay, let's shift that over to Austin Eckler. He has shown a success in shorter snaps as well, so we can make that comparison. And then we talk about Bijan, and you mentioned it yourself earlier that you're worried about the Falcons' overall offensive success. And then we say, oh, man, well, Christian McCaffrey, he's going to be safe, right? He's going to be someone that we could really anchor down to. But then you realize maybe he's not with Elijah Mitchell. And maybe someone else feels differently about it. That's the beauty of this game that we all love. But for me, if I go down the list, I feel more certain about CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown's production than any of those people we just mentioned. And I don't know if that's wrong of me to just think that, but that's life.
I think Royal Slade is a little worried about that overusage. He also on Khalil Herbert, he's fearful that Roshan Johnson will pass him quickly. We'll see about that. I think so. I kind of like I've gone through my phases of Chicago, and something I end up doing a lot is I buy the cheapest piece of whatever group that I'm kind of interested in, and kind of live with that. I had heard from Hub Arkush from Pro Football Weekly that Deonta Foreman a few weeks back, early in camp, looked like the clear-cut starter. Clearly, evidence now says the contrary, right? That it's Khalil Herbert. Mm-hmm. and he's been super explosive. And I'm kind of in on this with maybe Johnson coming in as a third down back or or whatever. But this is, I think, what we're talking about here is where you've just got to get ready to deal with the fact that there are going to be multiple pieces used in a backfield. It's just not going to be a single guy no matter what. You're just hoping you have the lead guy. I think in Herbert's case, it's a pretty fair expectation at this point.
Oh, 100%. And what I would also say is that for me, at least, again, shouting out Dwayne, it's hard to not to, but the things that I think really matter for running backs are being involved in the short down and distance offense, which means 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, 2nd and 10, etc. To be involved in the 2-minute drill and to be involved in the third down offense, right? So typically short down and distance ends up, or long down and short distance ends up being in the 2-minute offense primarily. They end up being the same units. But that's where fantasy production is made, right? When you're on a drive, when you're heading towards the red zone, when you're inside the 20, that's the offense that you want to be in. I will be very confident in saying that Roschon Johnson at no point in this NFL season outside of injury to Khalil Herbert will be in the third down package or in the short down and distance package. He will be in the goal line package, most likely. He'll be in the situations in which a bruising running back should be involved in. I was actually encouraged by some of Roschon's route running ability in the pre-draft process. I thought that people gave him a little bit of an unfair shake. I thought that realistically speaking, being behind who he was in college, like you're not going to get all the opportunities to showcase. Right. That's just that's reality. But same thing with Damian Harris and James Cook. Like, say what you want about archetypes of running backs, but James Cook is a third down back and Damian Harris isn't. So I don't have concerns that Roschon will completely take over Khalil Herbert's role, but I'd be lying to you if I said that I don't have any concerns about Roschon taking over the early down offense or being their first rushing option, and I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, I think mostly most widely being viewed as a receiving asset right now. We'll see if that carries over. So a couple of interesting questions here. Who JSC wants to know, it's a loaded question, he says, but who's the most valuable player in fantasy football? And I'll tack on, why isn't it Travis Kelce?
Okay. All right. So I think now, as it stands, the most valuable player in football, and you're going to give me a hard time about this, I think it's Antonio Gibson. I really do. I think if obviously he's not going to score the most points that we're talking about, so no one cliff this or anything. But I think that Antonio Gibson is going about 20 picks too late. I think Antonio Gibson should firmly be in that James Conner, Isaiah Pacheco, DeAndre Swift area. And, Jordan, you were just talking about wide receivers earlier. Yeah, of course. But I think when it comes to value, like you're talking about these situations, and man, I love me standing up some Antonio Gibson. I also love James Cook. He would be in that conversation with me. Calvin Ridley is another one that I'm really high on. Deontay Johnson would earlier in the offseason when he was going like 65 to 70, the answer would have been firmly Deontay Johnson. Now I think it's really he's in the 50s. It's adjusted to where he should be.
So it's basically as much about price. The value, it comes from price. So I'd throw Travis Kelce out there as giving you leverage over the field. Also, you're paying like crazy for the leverage over the field, right? But you're going to have to, and so you factor that in. I kind of got that. I kind of get that whole approach there. And that is an interesting.
I love Kelce too, though. I do. Right, I mean, if I probably would rather if you're putting me in a draft with my peers that other people that we'll be looking at, right? And I have to try to do a good job. I would feel probably more comfortable with Kelce than McCaffrey. I'm not going to take Kelce at 3 or 4. But I would feel more comfortable with that. And
I have. If you're in multiple drafts, probably you have as well, right?
Of course,
you're mixing it up for sure.
Yeah, and I really also I think there's something too, especially in competitive formats. There's a lot of value in getting a really good tight end and a really good quarterback. And when we were meant to mention again the Kings Classic broadcast, because the Sharp Room, obviously, right, the industry's greatest, and it was a 14-team draft. And I think in those formats, it might be even more important. One thing that we talk about a lot is the race to the flex. How do you get the strongest flex over your opponents? Right. And This is not the best way to do that, obviously, because you're getting one position behind. And especially if you want to try to get Mahomes and Kelsey, you got to really work hard to get the volume of players that you need. But man, something about that elite tight end build where you could get a Mark Andrews, a Travis Kelsey, Darren Waller is another one this season that it gets you excited, right? I know it's a hot seat, but I'm shivering because it's so cool. And it's like, we're talking about a player going, I don't know if we're going to consider 80 mid-round or what we want to consider it in a draft, but he's got a legit chance to lead his offense in targets.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's almost my expectation at this point that he's going to do that. By the way, hello, Shane Manila. Nice to see you out there. Scampers or Dame, thanks for coming in. Dame Overboard, you heard it here first. Gibson, running back
Dame.
one. So I think it's interesting with guys like, and maybe we'll focus on the Commanders here. I know we want to talk some wide receivers, so we'll get there. We'll kind of spin this in that direction as well. But again, I'm often buying the cheaper piece. So I'm probably getting more Brian Robinson than I am Gibson right now. And I feel like here's a guy but probably they're throwing him the ball a little more. I'm a little enthusiastic about that. But also, he got shot in the knee last year, and he was still reasonably good, earned a lot of time. What are your thoughts on the splits between those two?
So it's a similar answer than what I would say about the Chicago backs. And I think that Gibson is going to be on the field in the times and situations in which we want him to be. And I think Brian Robinson probably is priced appropriately where he is. And I think that Gibson's a little bit cheap right now, So when we're talking about what that looks like, for me at least, I always want pass catching running backs. I'll do whatever I can to get them. And there's also a lot of value to players like Brian Robinson. And there's a lot of understanding in the market where if you look at it and you say to yourself, who are these running backs that have really gotten steamed up recently, right? It's James Cook, it's Antonio Gibson a little bit. Zach Charbonnet would have been more steamed if it wasn't for his injury a few weeks ago. And the Khalil Herberts, early in the offseason, he was a 122 ADP. Last offseason, you were able to get him in the 170s, 160s. A lot of the market groupthink has switched towards pass catching running backs being more expensive than plotters. So that's why I think you mentioned James Conner earlier. I think that he's a great value, right? He might not have the pass catching upside that we need, but I think that he's got a great upside, arguably more upside than Isaiah Pacheco, going in that same similar range. So I would love to hear your case though on Robinson. Is it just price or what's the balance there?
It's price and anticipated volume is probably the lead carrier, right? And I'm hoping he gets some more fortuitous opportunities in this offense, but that's what it's going to depend on. You mentioned the pass catching guys. I just throw out there Jerick McKinnon still, sitting around. What's his ADP right now in underdog? 125. What are your thoughts on him versus Pacheco then? You said you like Pacheco. What are your thoughts on McKinnon? Are we hanging a little too much on that late season run or the last 2 years late season runs, I would say? Could we see a little more of them this year?
So I'm a big McKinnon fan, and last year the combination of him and Zay Jones really took me through the Best Ball Mania finals, majorly, and they were two of my highest rostered players, which was very lucky for me. But when you think about it, Jerick McKinnon was a last round pick. He was an 18th round or a 17th round running back, right? Pickup. And that's beautiful. I have I used to be a really, really big sucker for spark score athletes. And Jerick McKinnon, when he came out, he broke the scale. I also used to be a really big sucker for people who played quarterback in college. I was like, put him in the Wildcat, do it all, and same thing with Ryan Tannehill being able to be a wide receiver in college, right? I used to, for whatever reason, I used to really buy into that. And I got text after text last year. Finally, McKinnon came through 8 years later, you got it. And I was like, you're goddamn right. So I will take Jerick McKinnon quite a bit, but I do think that 120 for him is a little bit rich. We're also seeing some stuff with CEH that doesn't make me feel very comfortable. I don't think CEH is that good. I think that there's situations where, like, I think CEH, if he gets a hole, he could really run through it well, but then he's going to get chased down. He's going to fall over. For me, if I'm picking a running back to roster right now, it hurts me to say it, but it's Pacheco, then McKinnon, then CEH. But I'll pull up the Best Ball Hub now to see what I have of McKinnon. But I assume it's in the single digits just because his price has been really tough, and you want those players and you want to roster them. But yeah, I got McKinnon at 9%, so a little bit over the market. But like I said, last year I had him in like 29% of my teams. So it's been a clear change for me for sure.
Yeah, I'm a little higher. A little higher. Not as high as I am on Cutter. I think at that price point, I'm usually looking for a player with that kind of upside. I think you look at his late season run, talking to the people who cover the team on a daily basis this year, they expect his role to maybe be more consistent over the course of the entire season. If that's the case, then he is going to be a value there. If it's just a narrow band of the season again, like if it's the last 6 games, I mean, even if he's running back 2 over those last 6 games, it's when I want him to be it. But I think that's the appeal to me, is the possibility that Andy Reid will come to his senses and give him that role over the entire course of the season. Ooh. So, and it might be over optimistic. That said, I do have many 20th round shares of Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
I've been doing some more of those recently too. And I suggest that everybody do that. Like, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what, like another guy I was into a little bit earlier in the summer. We got this guy at Fantasy Life, Bob. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but his name's Jonathan Fuller. And for his comparison to exposure and following versus knowledge might be the furthest out of whack that I've ever seen in the industry. He's one of our sharpest guys, full stop, and he's an amazing best ball mind. But he really put Pierre Strong on my radar earlier in the summer. And even though things have changed and, we had the trade a couple of days ago, I still feel really happy about it. So, like, when you're looking at these 20th round picks, these 18 round picks in your home league drafts, when you're drafting round 15, round 16, you want to make some choices that you could live with. And also remember that you could cycle through these players. If you have a thing for, I'll tell you the player that I have a thing for later that's a running back. But if you have a thing for Pierre Strong and Elliott or Fournette, mix them up. Try to give yourself some ranges of outcomes. Obviously, in your most important league, and the one that you don't want to face a fantasy punishment for or something like that, then you'll do it and you'll make your best decision. But when you talk about those different players, man, like I hear you on McKinnon, and I have I'm a little bit behind on my drafting. I got 50 more Best Ball Mania drafts to do in the next week. I got 102 done, so I got 48 left. And things been really busy at Fantasy Life, so I'm disappointed in myself. But I'll make sure I get a couple more McKinnon shares here and there. And also with that with a stack with the Bengals or Chiefs, really like that also, because a lot of those players are really expensive, and especially if you're stacking Bengals, you don't really have many options after Tyler Boyd, right? So getting a nice bring back with McKinnon is pretty sexy to me.
Yeah. So a couple questions here. Dame Overboard wants to know, for Waller, is there any concern with the passing offense that if it doesn't throw much more than last year? Like, what's going to happen at that cost we're spending on Waller if they're only throwing for 3,500 yards?
I think it's a pretty concentrated offense, right? We have Saquon Barkley. We have a really big group of slot wide receivers. I'm not sure who or what, but none of them have really shown an ability to earn targets. Darius Slayton might be the best non-Darren Waller target earner on the team, and I'm a Slayton guy too, but that's not saying much. Hodgkins is in a similar boat. They're gonna run. So you like Hodgins?
I like Hodgins. The receiving asset not named Barkley and Waller there that I like is Hodgins.
Yeah, I would. That would be my number one too, but he's also a lot more expensive than Slayton, right? And that's something I think about. I think that he's definitely the best in the receiver room overall in terms of like career upside and everything like that. But for me, it's gonna be concentrated. If Darren Waller doesn't come out with like a 28% target share by the end of the season, I'm gonna be kind of surprised. If you're able to get a tight end that gets a 19 to 21% target rate on their team, they're gonna be elite. It's going to happen. I promise. Like, look at the utilization report every week, and you will see that. You will see that if you could get a 21% target rate as a tight end in the history of fantasy, those players just don't do poorly. Maybe a couple outliers here and there, but they just don't. And you talk about Travis Kelce, and that's why you overpay for it. That's why you try to get that big of an edge over the field, because when it works, it's going to work in a major way.
Right, and I do look at the utilization report, and everyone should, and be fantasy life. So just a couple comments too. Love hearing that Antonio Gibson took him as a running back too in the 8th round. Or yesterday, running backs were going very early. People find that appealing. Love this show. New to it this year. Well, I'm glad to have you, Ken. Thanks for coming. The backfield question that I want to finish up with, then we'll get to the wide receivers a little bit. Wanted to know the views of Seahawks, but also the Eagles. I think we've kind of run through the Seahawks a little bit, but how are you handling the Eagles? Is it 10-foot pole time, or is there somebody there you can get close to?
I'm a little bit more afraid now than I was a little bit ago. I'll be 100% transparent. If you would have asked me a month ago who I thought, not the most valuable, because my answer still would have been Deontay Johnson, but if you would have asked me the running back that I was trying to draft the most of in maybe mid-July, it would have been DeAndre Swift. I was like, this guy, man, if everything goes right for him, it's going to be real nice. Now with Gainwell being a little bit more involved, it's really scary. It seems like he might be their third down option. And if he's their third down option, there doesn't leave much left on the bone for someone like Swift. You got the tush push you got to worry about with Jalen Hurts. And so right now I'm not quite 10-foot pole, but in golf, there are these golf ball retrievers that have those telescoping poles that reach out. I'd be using one of those with the option to expand later is what I would say. And right now I have enough exposure to Swift. I don't have much Rashad Penny. Never really been a big Penny guy overall, but doesn't make me feel like I'm not super confident that I don't have a lot of Penny either this year. It's the Eagles offense. It's super explosive. They're going to score a lot of points. Who's your guy in that offense? Is it the cheapest? What are you doing?
No, my guy's Penny on this. And this goes back to talking to beat writers over the course of the offseason. Yep. All of them up to recently thought it was going to be Penny. I still think their points are fair. Then I read the latest love-hate from your employer, Matthew Berry, also a Penny guy a little bit. But I just think Penny's a super good ball carrier running behind that offensive line. I talked to Chris McPherson from the team's website about Swift in particular and said, how big of a role? He goes, it's going to be great. They remember last year when he tore them asunder in the game against Detroit, against Philadelphia. And I said, well, why is it going to be different? Why is this team that targeted their running backs fewer times than any other team in the NFL going to suddenly target this guy like he's a big piece of the offense? Well, because he's a better receiver. I said, well, then who? Miles Sanders, who caught 50 passes as a rookie? I remained a little skeptical on Swift. Not that he isn't going to have some spike games, but I think now, I'm glad all my investment. I'm willing to. I'm not going to die on the Rashad Penny hill, but I will take a minor flesh wound on that hill.
Yeah. So I forgot. I was misunderstood. Matthew, if you're listening, I'm a big Penny guy, big Penny believer. Big company guy, he's definitely he's actually
offensive line and the running ability. I think we can go back to that 2021, that late season run. I think we do this a lot in fantasy though. And in life, we see that thing that we love and we want it to come back. I joke all the time. We're still waiting for 2013 Josh Gordon to walk back in the door. It's not happening, and I may never see 2021 Rashad Penny either.
I'm waiting for Dorial Green Beckham still. That's who I'm waiting for, right? I'm waiting to have him to see. Actually, I think he's in jail, so I don't think he's going to make a late career return, but maybe. So I think generally, as we're talking, I'm starting to see this trend where maybe it's just with Gibson and Robinson and Swift with Penny, but I kind of tend towards that, third down back, scat back archetype, and you seem to be falling on the other side, that's life, right? That's the value. I remember last year in Scott Fishbowl, was drafting right after Dave Kluge, and I drafted Kenneth Walker, and I said, yeah, and he drafted Rashad Penny right after. He goes, yeah, so it's just the way it works sometimes.
I think this is one of the things that I find fascinating about you is because you do things differently, right? And I think that's something that catches our attention as we're in the middle of draft rooms is why is he doing it so different and what am I missing? And that's why you're here. And I'm loving this. So let's talk about these wide receivers. You like that, you mentioned some of these guys, Christian Watson, Deontay Johnson. There's a whole range of guys. Talk about mining that fertile ground of mid-tier wide receivers.
Yeah, so I mean, you can't go wrong. You really can't. Like, there's so many good options. Like, you're talking Deontay Johnson, Drake London, Christian Watson, Marquise Brown on the far end of things. Like, I'm really open to every single one of them. We could talk about Christian Watson and you could say, oh man, it was a fluke last year, new quarterback, really, really high volume or high scores on low volume. Maybe Romeo Dabbs or Jaden Reed's going to really step up. I don't think so. Like, when you see these sort of athletic measurements and when you see this sort of utilization right out of the gate, like that's nice. Let's talk about Jameson Williams. He's a little bit later in the draft. I'm a little bit out on him. I'm starting to wonder if I'm too dumb, right? Like, I talked to Dwayne, I asked Ian, I say, hey, like, am I like giving this guy too hard of a time? And the reality is that Christian Watson's doing what we thought Williams could do, right? He's being a main piece in the offense. It was on low volume last year. But right now, if I'm going for upside and I'm going for broke, after the first real tier of wide receiver drop off, and I consider that kind of around Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? The Garrett Wilson, Amon-Ra St. Brown's, Devontae Adams, all the way from, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase down. I love every single one of those players. I will be drafting them whenever I get a chance to. But when we shift to that second gear, right? I think personally that after you take Devontae Smith and T. Higgins off the board, I'm really, really loving that 40-ish range, right? So if I had to rank them, I would be ranking them Christian Watson. I would be ranking them Drake London. After that, I would be ranking Deontay Johnson after that. I'm not taking Deontay Johnson then because of his ADP. And then after that, my favorite one to draft in the range right now is Marquise Brown. And I think personally at like a 61 ADP, it's way, way too high. I think that he should be not drafted next to Drake London, not drafted next to Christian Watson, but at the tail end of that draft, right? Let's remember here, we just lost JSN in the 60s, right? He's going down a little bit further. We just lost Jerry Jeudy in the 39 range. I've heard some reports recently that he might miss up to 8 weeks, and that's scary. And after that range, it's a pretty big drop-off. Like, I don't want to get to pick 100 without having 5 wide receivers. I really don't. Like, I don't want to be forced to draft Mike Thomas. You can't make me do it. Like, I do not want to be forced to do that. I just can't.
Because it's going to be 2019 Mike Thomas. Come on, everyone knows that.
I just can't do it. Is that the tail end of 2019? I want to believe, but I find myself draft after draft. If I don't get 2 of the people that we just discussed, I feel bad about it. Another player that I'm trying to get in as many drafts as humanly possible right now is Calvin Ridley. I was wrong about him earlier in the offseason. A Christian Kirk in that same conversation. I personally would be taking him probably after Marquise Brown, but because of value, you can't. With me, I convinced myself in the beginning of this draft season in July that Calvin Ridley was at the bottom of a tier break where I'm cool waiting a little bit. I thought that maybe DK Metcalf was like a solid step ahead of him. And now I'm reconsidering what I feel about Calvin Ridley. And I was trying to convince myself earlier in the offseason that Kirk could make a case to be that number 1 wide receiver. I've since relaxed that stance a little bit.
Right. If you talk to people in Jacksonville, they'll tell you Zay Jones looks more like a wide receiver 1 than Christian Kirk right now. Not that he is, but that he has that look. And so that highlights something I talked ready to draft them. We have to be ready to bail from our narrative. When evidence is presented that tells us to bail from the narrative, that's how you succeed in fantasy, is not being stuck on that. One of my narratives, one of the things I'm big on this year is not letting what I feel are less than ideal quarterback situations scare me off wide receivers, because I did that last year and I missed out on some really good receivers because of it. So there's a question kind of based on this. So Jimmy Williams wants to know about our thoughts on Mike Evans, Tyler Lockett, and Gabe Davis. They don't have quarterback situations, but I think Lockett is being crazily overlooked in drafts this year. I can't get enough of him. But I think Evans, too. I mean, and I think that's quarterback related. You see him going well into the group that we were just talking about at the tail end of that group. Should he be going higher? And is Gabe Davis like a post bust breakout play?
Yeah, post hype sleeper, right? Yes and no. We have a new person coming on staff next week. We'll be announcing it, and he's getting into fantasy and really excited to be working with him, right? And as we're talking about things, he threw out a quarterback in the bottom, the 15 range. And for the sake of conversation, let's just say he was talking about a Ryan Tannehill, right? Or maybe even at the higher points of it, maybe a Bryce Young, or maybe we're talking about a Mac Jones or a Brock Purdy, right? There's a lot of really good quarterbacks in the NFL. So right now, I will not lie to anyone in chat. I really feel more comfortable about my drafts when I leave with one of the quarterbacks down to Deshaun Watson. If I could get out of there with one of those guys or Deshaun Watson's kind of a little bit, we have, my rankings would be Allen, Mahomes, Hurts, Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Justin Fields, so on and so forth. And if I really want one of that first group, I really feel good about my teams when I get one of that first group. And for me, if I get one of those elite three, I'm cool with taking Hurts over Allen. To me, it's dealer's choice, whatever the best value is. But from there, I think that Geno Smith's a good quarterback situation. I don't think Daniel Jones is a bad quarterback situation. I think there's an argument to be made that Daniel Jones' situation could be better than Dak's this year, right? I'm personally not going to make that argument, right? But you get down a little bit deeper. You talk about Kirk Cousins. I'm cool with that. He doesn't run, but I'm cool with that. He's got great weapons and a good offense. Talk about Tua. I'd love that. Anthony Richardson, I'd love that too, right? So what I would say is, if you're talking about Mike Evans, then yeah, I'm a little bit concerned. And what I would also say is that I'm concerned with Mike Evans as a player. I'm concerned with large, over-the-top, not game-breaking athleticism or speed wide receivers like Mike Evans. I think that the defenses have changed in such a massive way to have two high safeties that if you're not a freak of an athlete, or if you're not getting on the receiving end of a pass from a very good quarterback, it's going to be tough for players like Mike Evans. I think that's where you separate from Christian Watson, because he is a game-breaking athlete right now, right? But
so
then,
funny. I was just going to say, so the complaint is he is not Christian Watson.
Yeah, that's the complaint. Right? Yeah, but I will say that I'm a big Godwin guy. I think that a lot of Evans' shortcomings actually help Chris Godwin get volume, right? And Baker Mayfield's an interesting fella. I feel like he stays in the pocket just about more than anyone in their right mind should. And he waits and he waits and he waits. But if we're talking about a comparison between Mike Evans and Marquise Brown, oh my God, then it's a no-brainer, right? If we're talking about a comparison between a Mike Evans and a Deontay Johnson, again, it's a no-brainer. If we're talking about Mike Evans and Godwin, again, no-brainer. But if we're talking about Mike Evans compared to a Jameson Williams, compared to a Cortland Sutton, then it's also a no-brainer for me. And, it's hard to really differentiate between what a bad player is doing, or what a good player is doing on a bad offense, and how a good player is being impacted by the forces around them. And I'm staying away from Mike Evans because I'm not a fan of his archetype more than the offensive situation, to be honest.
And you are clearly not alone on that based on ADP this year. All right, we've about plumbed the depths here and killed our time. A great conversation. Really appreciate you coming on, Jordan. Just in case somebody doesn't know, tell us a little bit about what you got going on at Fantasy Life.
Absolutely. Well, what I got going on is just being thankful for you having me on. It's always a pleasure to chat, and everyone knows here that you're one of the best guys in the industry. And at a moment's notice, you ask, and I'll be here. At Fantasy Life, we got a lot coming, Bob. We just relaunched the website in July. Everything that we do is free. On Monday mornings in the NFL season, we will have a full suite of data completely free. We'll be the only company in the industry that has that data out as fast as we do. We've been really busting our butts to get that done. We have our Game Hub launching in a couple days, which is a one-stop shop for everything in fantasy. We did it last year. Now we're doing it again this year. And what I'll tease a little bit is that next week we're making a couple really, really, really big announcements that I'm really excited about, that I feel is going to take Fantasy Life to the next spot. Last month we had our fundraise announcement, and we had, it's humbling to say, but LeBron James invested, Jonathan Legend invested, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Austin Eckler. Like, it's so humbling to know that the players who we're putting in our lineups every week are willing to support us and willing to see that we have as much potential as we think we have too. So just go to fantasylife.com. Everything's free. Subscribe to the newsletter at MB Fantasy Life on all socials, and we'll see you all season long.
And watch Jordan Fiegleman when he drafts, because it's fantastic. I love it. All right, everybody. Appreciate y'all coming. You know the deal. I'll be on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio Thursday and Friday. Friday, I'm going to be on NFL Radio. Check that. 7 to 10 p.m. We're doing the big 3-hour special. We'll be going through that. They'll replay it on the Fantasy Channel. They'll replay it over the course of the weekend, so check that out. Then next week, back to Monday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. All the stuff that you like. And go to footballdiehards.com. Promo code Diehards. Get 15% off. I'm Bob Harris. He's Jordan Fiegleman.